Have you ever imagined a place in Pennsylvania where the past still lingers, and every shadow hides a story of terror? In today's video, we take you inside a haunted asylum, an abandoned Pennsylvania asylum filled with ghostly whispers, paranormal activity, and forgotten histories. Every hallway, every room in this asylum tells a chilling story: patients' cries, doctors' cruelty, and the lost laughter of children. This is not just a location. It's a living ghost story that has haunted the place for decades. If you want a true paranormal experience, stay with us as we explore how this haunted asylum continues to hold its secrets and terrors, even after being abandoned for years. Prepare yourself. We are about to step inside the darkness, where the past and present collide, and every corner hides a haunting tale waiting to be uncovered. Ghosts of the Abandoned Asylum in Pennsylvania. First-person, slow-building horror. I remember the first time I set foot in the old Penhist Asylum. The rumors had followed me like shadows long before I ever arrived. Whispers of patients who never left, screams frozen into the walls, doctors whose experiments defied reason. I had to see it for myself. Curiosity, reckless, insatiable curiosity, had a way of driving people to places they shouldn't go. The gate was rusted, swinging slightly in the wind, groaning like the asylum itself was waking from a long, dark slumber. I paused, the gravel crunching under my boots, and I felt it, an almost tangible weight, like the air itself was thick with memories that weren't mine. Inside, the hallways were a maze of decay, peeling paint, broken floorboards, and the faint metallic smell of rust and old medicine filled every room. I had brought a flashlight, but its beam barely pierced the darkness. My footsteps echoed too loudly, as though the asylum resented intrusion. I found old patient files scattered across a table. Yellowed papers detailed stories of anger, depression, hallucinations, and fear. Names blurred together: Thompson, Green, Avery. Their fates were whispered in short notes about containment, treatment, or simply lost. Each file seemed to scream silently at me. That's when I heard the first whisper. First, I thought it was the wind, but it was clearer than that. A soft voice, almost pleading, "Help me!" I froze. The beam of my flashlight trembled in my hand. The hallway ahead seemed to stretch farther than it should, twisting in impossible angles. Then, from the darkness, a shape moved, too fast to be human, yet unmistakably there. I backed up, my heart hammering. "Who's there?" I called out. Only silence answered, but it was a silence that weighed on me. Oppressive, like the asylum itself was holding its breath. I pressed forward, drawn by some force I didn't understand. Rooms opened up to empty beds, shattered windows, and overturned chairs. Shadows danced where no light touched, and then I saw it. A figure, standing at the end of a hallway, pale and still. I couldn't tell if it was a man, a woman, or something else entirely. Its eyes, dark, empty, met mine for a moment before it vanished into the wall itself. I stumbled back, heart racing, and my flashlight flickered violently. I knew then I wasn't alone. Something lingered here, something trapped between life and death, between memory and madness. The asylum was alive, and it had noticed me. I spent hours wandering the halls, recording everything I saw, hoping the evidence would make sense later. Doors would slam shut behind me, even though no one was there. Footsteps echoed in empty corridors. Faint laughter, distant and hollow, rang in my ears. Every corner I turned seemed to hold a new terror, a new story that refused to remain buried. It wasn't until I found the old surgical wing that I realized the full horror. Tables, rusted and stained, still bore the marks of procedures performed long ago. Instruments lay scattered, some with jagged edges, some bent unnaturally, as if the hands that held them had not entirely left this world. And in the center of the room, etched into the floorboards, were words scratched deep into the wood. "Do not wake them. They remember." That night I barely slept. I could feel them watching from the darkness, from the walls, from beneath the floor. And when I tried to leave, the exit had disappeared. The asylum had shifted, become something unrecognizable, a labyrinth designed to trap me. I didn't know then if I would survive the night, but I knew one thing for certain. The ghosts of Penhist Asylum were real, and they were hungry for the living. Descent into madness. I forced myself to keep moving, despite the terror gnawing at my mind. The hallways seemed to twist and stretch endlessly. I could hear the faint shuffle of feet behind me, but whenever I spun around, there was nothing. Just shadows and the oppressive silence that followed each step. The surgical wing had led me to a set of double doors, their paint flaking, hinges squealing like tortured screams. I pushed them open, and a gust of cold air hit me, an unnatural cold that seeped into my bones. Inside was a ward I hadn't seen on any of the asylum's maps. Room 12. It smelled of decay and something fouler I couldn't name. Inside, beds were aligned neatly, though the sheets were yellowed and torn. Patient charts lay atop each mattress, open to pages detailing strange behaviors and symptoms. Insomnia, violent outbursts, whispered voices. Some pages were smeared with what looked like dried blood. I shivered. Then I saw her, a small figure crouched at the foot of one bed. Her hair hung in matted tangles, face hidden. I called out, but she didn't move. Slowly, I stepped closer, and she raised her head. Her eyes were hollow, black pits that seemed to suck in the light. She whispered, barely audible, "He watches? He always watches." Before I could respond, she vanished. The air felt thicker after that, almost suffocating. I realized then, the spirits weren't just wandering. They were aware. They were conscious of me, and I had become an intruder in their eternal prison. I pressed forward, moving through room after room. Hallways began to feel alive, breathing around me. I heard distant screaming, cries of torment echoing from somewhere far below. I followed the sound, and it led me to a staircase, descending into the asylum's bowels. The basement was a labyrinth of damp corridors and broken pipes. Rusted cages lined the walls, remnants of restraints used on patients who had been deemed uncontrollable. And there, in one corner, a shadow moved differently than the others, more deliberate, more intelligent. It spoke, though no lips moved. "Why are you here? Leave. Leave before it remembers you." I froze, unsure if I was hearing a voice or feeling it pressed directly into my mind. Panic rose, but curiosity kept me rooted. I needed to know what had happened here, what had driven this place to become a haven for the dead. I stumbled upon a locked room, the keyhole rusted shut. Something inside scratched at the door, clawing at it with unrelenting force. I could hear whispers behind it, overlapping voices chanting the same warning over and over. "Do not awaken them? Do not awaken them." I didn't know who or what was inside. The scratching stopped abruptly, replaced by silence so thick I thought it might crush me. Then a voice, clear and deliberate, echoed from the shadows. "You shouldn't be here. They don't like visitors." My flashlight flickered, and the walls seemed to breathe. Faces appeared in the peeling paint, patient faces twisted in silent screams. Some were pleading, some angry, some empty and hollow. Each glance felt like it burned into my soul. I fled down another hallway, but it was no longer the one I had entered. Doors led to rooms I hadn't seen before, some containing old medical equipment, some filled with remnants of the patients' lives. A lone shoe, a broken toy, a tattered dress. The atmosphere thickened. The air itself seemed charged with malevolence. Then I heard it, footsteps behind me. Quick, deliberate steps. Not shuffling like before, but running. Something or someone was coming. I didn't dare look back. I ran blindly, tripping over debris, my flashlight beam swinging wildly. Finally, I burst into what looked like the main hall, only to find the exit gone. The asylum had shifted again, walls closing in, corridors changing. Panic clawed at me. I realized then that I had crossed a threshold. I wasn't merely exploring a haunted building. I had entered a place that existed partially outside of reality, where time and space bent to the will of the trapped souls. And they were watching me, waiting. Secrets of Penhist. The deeper I went, the more the asylum seemed to resist me. Every hallway twisted into impossible angles. Ceilings stretched higher than they should. Shadows twisted unnaturally. The air was heavy with decay and something worse, something alive and watching. I found a small office, dust-covered and filled with forgotten ledgers and journals. On one desk lay a leather-bound diary belonging to Dr. William Harker, a psychiatrist who had run the asylum in the 1920s. As I flipped through the pages, I realized the true horror of what had occurred here. Harker's words were clinical, precise, and yet filled with a twisted obsession. Patients weren't merely treated, they were experimented on. He wrote of sensory deprivation, isolation, and therapies that blurred the line between life and death. Some patients were placed in stasis, locked away for weeks on end, until they began to hallucinate so vividly that they could no longer distinguish reality. Others disappeared. The diary ended abruptly. The final entry was scrawled in trembling handwriting. They remember, they see. I fear the building itself has become a prison for their souls. I hear them whisper even in my sleep. If anyone reads this, leave. Do not disturb them. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing my flashlight. In the sudden darkness, I felt a hand, ice cold and clammy, grip my shoulder. I spun around, but there was nothing. Just a voice, soft and sinister. You shouldn't be here. I stumbled backward, tripping over a fallen chair. When I looked up, the walls were no longer walls, they were a shifting tableau of images. Patients screaming, doctors hunched over them, shadows writhing in agony. The asylum itself had become a living memory, replaying the horrors of its past. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A patient, a young man in a tattered hospital gown, walked slowly toward me. His eyes were empty, his mouth open in a silent scream. As he passed, I felt a rush of emotion. Fear, pain, desperation. He raised a skeletal hand and pointed to a nearby door, then vanished. I approached the door cautiously. Inside was what had once been the treatment chamber. Rusted equipment littered the room. On the wall, written in deep gouges, were words that chilled me to the bone. They hunger for freedom. They are never at rest. The whispers began again, this time louder, overlapping, almost chanting. I couldn't distinguish words, only emotion. Anger, sorrow, fear. The building itself seemed alive, pulsating with the trapped souls of hundreds of patients. I realized then that these spirits were not just echoes, they were aware. They had remembered everything. Their pain, their terror, the cruelty they endured. And now they wanted someone to witness it, someone to bear their story. Suddenly, the air grew colder. Shadows detached from the walls and coalesced into forms, grotesque and twisted, half human, half nightmare. They moved toward me, silent but purposeful. Panic seized me. I ran, dodging their grasp, my flashlight flickering wildly. I heard a familiar voice, a woman's this time, calling my name. Do not stay, do not stay. But I couldn't leave. Something compelled me forward, deeper into the asylum, toward a room I had never seen before. The old chapel. The chapel was small and dark, stained glass windows broken and shattered. Pew after pew was filled with shadowy figures, heads bowed as if in mourning. In the center, a figure stood, tall, draped in a doctor's coat, face obscured by shadows. Harker, I realized, or what remained of him. He spoke, voice echoing unnaturally. You see what we did, what we allowed. You must bear witness, or they will never rest. The ground shook, dust falling from the ceiling. The walls groaned as hundreds of voices rose together in a deafening cacophony. Free us, free us, free us. I dropped to my knees, terrified, overwhelmed. The spirits surrounded me, pressing against my mind, filling my vision with images of suffering. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped. The diary in my backpack called to me. I had to document this or it would be lost forever. I pulled out my camera and began recording, narrating what I saw. Shadows twisted, faces emerged, fleeting glimpses of lives stolen too soon. The whispers became voices, pleading, angry, desperate, and then suddenly silence. For a moment, the chapel was empty. I was alone, or so I thought. But in the quiet, I realized the asylum had shown me its truth. Its ghosts were not just spirits. They were memories, echoes of the cruelty that had occurred within these walls. And now they had entrusted me with their story. But escaping would be another challenge entirely. The haunting peaks. I could barely breathe. The chapel had emptied, but the air was charged, thick with a sense of impending doom. My camera shook in my hands, the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. Shadows whispered from every corner, coiling around my mind like living smoke. I knew I had to leave. Every instinct screamed at me to run, yet the asylum resisted. The corridors had changed again, twisting into a maze that seemed to anticipate my every move. Doors that had once been exits now led to brick walls. Windows revealed endless darkness instead of the outside world. Then I saw it, a corridor lined with mirrors. At first, it seemed normal, until I noticed my reflection moving independently. My mirrored self smiled, a cruel, twisted grin. I stumbled back, and the reflection spoke. Not with my voice, but with dozens of voices layered together. "You cannot leave. They won't let you." I turned and ran, adrenaline surging. Every step echoed like a drumbeat, calling attention to me. From the shadows, figures emerged. Patients, doctors, and something far worse. Their faces were twisted, unnatural, some skeletal, some bloated with unnatural shapes. They reached for me with grasping hands, but vanished whenever I tried to touch them. I reached a doorway marked records, hoping to find some clue to escaping. Inside, shelves of patient files stretched endlessly. I picked up random journals, diaries, medical notes. Each one screamed silently at me. Then I found it. A ledger, old and thick, bound in cracked leather. Flipping through, I discovered the asylum's darkest secret. Harker and his colleagues had experimented not just on the mind, but on the soul. They had attempted to trap consciousness, to preserve their patients' awareness beyond death, under the guise of treatment. The spirits weren't simply echoes. They were trapped, bound to the asylum forever, reliving their torment endlessly. A whisper cut through my thoughts. "You know now. You cannot leave." Suddenly, the room shifted. Shelves collapsed into walls of writhing faces. I was surrounded, pressed from all sides. The voices screamed together, a deafening chorus of pain and fury. The floor beneath me became translucent, revealing shadowed figures reaching upward, clawing at me. I fell to my knees, desperate. I remembered the diary, the repeated warnings. "Do not awaken them. Do not awaken them." I had awoken them by entering, by witnessing. Now, the asylum demanded more. It demanded recognition, acknowledgement of its horrors. I realized then, surviving meant bearing witness but also appeasing them. I forced myself to speak aloud, narrating everything I had seen. The corridors, the patients, the experiments, Harker's madness. My voice trembled, but the act seemed to calm the swirling shadows. The whispers softened, the hands retracted. Faces still pressed against the walls, but they no longer reached for me. Then I saw her again, the young girl from the ward. She smiled faintly, the hollow emptiness in her eyes softened for a moment. She pointed toward a doorway that had not been there before. "Go, before it changes its mind." I ran through the doorway, and for a brief moment, the asylum seemed to release me. I emerged into an overgrown courtyard. The night was quiet, unnaturally still, the moonlight casting eerie shadows across the crumbling walls. I didn't stop running until the asylum was far behind me. I looked back once. In the upper windows, shadows lingered, watching. The whispers, faint but persistent, carried on the wind. "We remember, we are not gone." I knew then that the ghosts of Penhist Asylum were eternal. They were trapped, bound by the cruelty of the living, and my encounter had only cemented their existence. But I had survived, and I carried their story with me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I see the faces, hear the whispers, Feel the cold grip of hands that should not exist. The asylum remains waiting, and it remembers anyone who dares to enter. Conclusion: the aftermath. I never truly left Penhist Asylum. Not really. Even after escaping into the quiet Pennsylvania night, the memory of those halls, those faces, followed me. Every shadow in my apartment seemed too long. Every creak of a floorboard echoed with whispers. The asylum didn't just haunt the building, it haunted me. In the weeks that followed, I reviewed my footage, hoping to understand what I had witnessed. The recordings were disturbing beyond explanation. Shadows shifted unnaturally. Faces appeared in frames where nothing had been visible to the eye. And sometimes, when I played the audio, faint voices whispered my name. I tried to tell people what I saw. Friends, colleagues, even paranormal investigators. Most dismissed it: mental exhaustion, stress, overactive imagination. But I knew what I had experienced was real. And the asylum, it still called to me. I learned more about its history from old newspapers and historical archives. Penhist had a reputation long before Harker. Patients vanishing, staff mysteriously disappearing, unexplained illnesses. Generations had been touched by the darkness within those walls. The experiments had ended decades ago, but the souls remained. Trapped, remembering, hungry for recognition. The final truth hit me one night, as I replayed my footage in a dark room. The ghosts weren't malicious. They weren't evil by nature. They were echoes of suffering, desperate for someone to acknowledge their pain, someone to see what had been done to them. Harker and his successors had tried to control them, to bend their spirits for their own purposes. But the building, and the souls trapped within, had outlasted every human hand. I realized that Penhist Asylum would always exist, not merely as a building, but as a vessel of memory, horror, and lingering humanity. It would continue to trap those who dared to enter, and I had become its reluctant witness. Even now, late at night, I can hear the whispers, soft at first, then louder, overlapping. We remember. We are not gone, bear witness. I warn anyone who hears this story. Curiosity can be deadly. The asylum is not just abandoned walls and shattered glass. It is alive in its own terrible way. Its ghosts are patient, waiting for someone new to stumble inside, to witness, to become part of their eternal story. I survived, but the asylum's shadow never left me. Every time I close my eyes, I see the corridors stretching infinitely, the hollow eyes of the patients, the hands reaching from the darkness. Penhist's ghosts will follow anyone who dares to tell their tale. And once you see them, once you hear their cries, you can never forget. The ghosts of Penhist Asylum are real, and they are always waiting, echoes of the lost. After returning to the grounds of Penhist at night, I realized that this place was not just an old asylum. It was a living entity. The air moved strangely, carrying with it whispers of the past. Cries, screams, and an endless echo of suffering. I entered a long corridor. The walls were crumbling, and in the beam of my flashlight, I could see countless shadows stretching across the floor. Suddenly, I felt a presence behind me. When I turned, there was no one. Only a dark shape, like a shadowed soul standing silently, watching. I continued forward, but with each step, the hallway seemed to stretch unnaturally. The floorboards groaned under my weight, and faint voices echoed from beneath. Sometimes children, sometimes the elderly, all whispering, all calling. I froze when I heard the faint shattering of glass, as if someone or something was circling me. Then I noticed a small door at the end of the hallway. The room beyond was pitch black, yet I could hear soft crying inside. Hesitantly, I opened the door. Inside was the shadow of a little girl, sitting on the cold floor, her head bowed. Her face was hidden, and her tiny hands reached upward, skeletal and trembling. She slowly lifted her head and stared directly at me. Her eyes were hollow voids, yet filled with something unbearable. Despair. She whispered, almost unintelligibly, "He's here. He never leaves." Before I could react, the shadows around the room began to move. They swirled, forming shapes of patients long gone. Some twisted in agony, others reaching silently as if pleading for release. I could feel their emotions pressing against my mind. Fear, anger, sorrow. Each spirit seemed aware of my presence, aware that I had entered their domain. My flashlight flickered, and the little girl vanished. In her place, a figure appeared at the far corner of the room. A man in a doctor's coat, but his features were grotesque, stretched into a permanent sneer. His eyes glowed faintly, and he raised a skeletal hand toward me. "You are trespassing where no living soul belongs," he intoned, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Every step you take brings you closer to them, closer to the truth you cannot bear." I stumbled backward, my heart hammering. The walls themselves seemed to breathe, closing in, expanding, warping the room into a nightmare labyrinth. I realized then that the asylum wasn't just haunted. It was alive, feeding on memories, emotions, and fear. Desperate to escape, I ran back down the hallway, but it had transformed. Doors led to walls, corridors twisted back on themselves, and the shadows followed relentlessly. The cries of the lost souls grew louder, overlapping into a deafening roar that shook the building. And yet, beneath the terror, a strange pull kept me moving forward. I knew that if I wanted to survive, I had to confront the spirits, to bear witness to their torment, or risk being trapped here forever. The heart of the asylum. The hallway twisted endlessly, as though the building itself were alive, guiding me deeper into its bowels. My flashlight trembled in my hand, barely cutting through the oppressive darkness. Every corner held a whisper, every shadow a hidden face. I stumbled upon a massive door, reinforced with iron and old locks. Something about it drew me, an almost magnetic pull that my rational mind wanted to resist. Trembling, I forced it open. Inside was a vast chamber I hadn't seen on any map, filled with rows of old medical equipment, broken restraints, and walls scrawled with frantic messages. "They watch, they remember, free us." A chill swept through the room, and I realized I wasn't alone. Figures began to emerge from the shadows, patients from every era, twisted by time and suffering. Their eyes followed me, and their mouths moved silently, screaming words I could almost hear, almost feel in my mind. Anger, fear, regret, despair. At the center of the room stood a figure taller than the rest. A man in a tattered doctor's coat, face obscured in darkness. I knew immediately this was Harker, or what remained of him. His presence radiated power, a cruel intelligence that had survived death itself. "So, you've come this far," he said, voice echoing, layered with whispers of the dead. "You seek the truth, yet the truth will consume you." I swallowed hard, fear tightening my chest. "What happened here?" I whispered. "We tried to preserve them," he said, gesturing to the ghostly patients. "The minds, the souls all trapped, reliving the torment, bound to this place. They are not at peace. They will never be at peace. Not until someone bears witness." The ghosts surged forward, their forms shifting from human to shadow, screaming, clawing, pressing against my very soul. I could feel their memories, their pain, searing into me. I staggered, nearly collapsing. The asylum was not just a building. It was a prison, a vessel for the suffering of hundreds, a place where time and death itself had no meaning. Then, something unexpected happened. A soft voice cut through the chaos. It was the little girl from before. "Speak. Tell them. Tell our story." I realized what I had to do. I began narrating everything I had seen. The patients, the experiments, Harker's diary, the cruel treatments, the endless suffering. My voice shook, but it carried across the chamber. The ghosts paused, their chaotic forms slowing as if listening, absorbing my words. Harker's figure loomed closer, but for the first time he seemed uncertain. The ghost's eyes, hollow and tormented, flickered with recognition, their endless rage tempered by acknowledgement. I continued, detailing the horror, the sorrow, the injustice. And then the room changed. The walls stopped shifting. The shadows stabilized. The cries softened to murmurs, and the weight pressing on my chest lifted slightly. For the first time since entering Penhist, there was a pause. Harker's voice was barely a whisper. "You have seen, you have told, but leaving is another matter. They will not let all go freely." I understood then that survival would not be simple. The asylum demanded more than curiosity. It demanded courage, awareness, and a willingness to carry the weight of its horrors beyond its walls. Trial of Shadows. The chamber still hummed with residual energy, the ghosts lingering like thick fog. Harker's shadow moved among them, seemingly orchestrating the chaos, but now I sensed hesitation. I had spoken, borne witness, but survival required more. The asylum wasn't done with me yet. I turned to leave, but the doorway I had entered through had vanished. In its place, a black void stretched infinitely. From the darkness, figures emerged, patients, doctors, and something far older, something not entirely human. Their eyes glowed faintly, fixated on me. Every shadow seemed alive, every whisper a direct pressure on my mind. A cold voice, layered with hundreds of others, echoed, "You cannot leave without proving yourself, without understanding our torment." Panic surged, but I forced myself to step forward. I had to confront them, to face the entirety of the asylum's nightmare. Each step brought visions. A young boy screaming as he was restrained, a woman pleading for release, a man disappearing into darkness. Memories not my own burned into my mind. Then Harker spoke again. "The test is simple. Endure, witness, survive. Only then can you leave." The shadows lunged, attempting to engulf me, their forms shifting between human and grotesque nightmare. I ducked and ran, adrenaline pushing me forward. The floor beneath me warped, turning into shifting tiles that threatened to swallow me whole. The walls closed in and stretched, a living labyrinth intent on consuming me. I stumbled into a small room, its walls covered with patient faces, their mouths moving silently. They were pleading, screaming, begging me to understand. I spoke aloud, narrating their torment again, this time as if speaking directly to them. "I see you. I know you're suffering. I will not forget you." For a moment, the room went silent. The oppressive weight lifted slightly, but Harker's figure loomed closer. His voice was calm now, but terrifying. "You may leave, but only if you carry the burden. Remember, the asylum does not forgive those who forget." A doorway appeared, glowing faintly, framed in moonlight. Beyond it lay the overgrown courtyard, the outside world. I sprinted toward it, but I could feel ghostly hands brushing against me, tugging, whispering, desperate. The spirits did not want me to go. They wanted acknowledgement, recognition of their pain. I burst into the night, collapsing on the damp grass. The asylum loomed behind me, silent for the first time, yet I knew it was not gone. Its presence lingered in the air, in the shadows, in the very ground I had fled. And I knew the ghosts watched, eternally trapped, eternally aware. As I looked back, the windows were filled with faint silhouettes, the little girl waving faintly before disappearing into darkness. I had survived, but the experience had changed me. Penhist's horrors had become part of me, and I carried their story forward, a burden I could never fully lay down. Final reflection and lingering horror. Even after escaping Penhist Asylum, I knew I had not truly left. The night air outside was quiet, deceptively calm, but I could still feel the shadows pressing at the edges of my mind. Each breeze seemed to carry faint whispers. "We remember. We are not gone." The days that followed were unbearable. Sleep offered no respite. In my dreams, the asylum rose before me, walls twisting impossibly, corridors stretching infinitely. Faces pressed against every surface, hollow eyes staring, mouths moving in silent screams. The little girl appeared repeatedly, sometimes pointing, sometimes silently watching, always reminding me of the story I now carried. I began reviewing my recordings, hoping to make sense of what I had witnessed. The footage was more than frightening, it was alive. Shadows moved independently, faint voices overlapped the audio, and sometimes entire figures appeared where I had seen nothing with my own eyes. Even when I turned off the camera, I could hear whispers faintly echoing in my apartment, as though the spirits had followed me. Friends and colleagues dismissed my experience as trauma, exhaustion, or overactive imagination. But I knew better. Penhist's ghosts were real. They were aware, intelligent, and trapped by the cruelty of the living. My intrusion had awoken them, and they had shared their story with me, entrusting me to bear witness. Through research, I learned the full history. Generations of patients subjected to cruel experiments, doctors obsessed with controlling the mind and soul, disappearances that had been covered up. The asylum itself had absorbed these horrors, feeding on pain, memory, and fear. And the ghosts, they had endured, preserved in the building's warped reality, trapped in endless cycles of suffering. I tried to move on, but even the ordinary world felt haunted. Shadows flickered in the corners of rooms, distant echoes of footsteps followed me, and sometimes, in the dead of night, I could hear a voice whisper my name. The asylum had not released me completely. I carried it inside me now, a permanent reminder that some horrors never truly end. I warn anyone who dares listen to this story. Curiosity can be deadly. The asylum is not just abandoned walls and shattered glass. It is alive. Its ghosts remember every act, every cruelty, and anyone who enters becomes part of its history. Even if you survive as I did, you cannot forget. The shadows follow, the whispers persist, and the souls of Penhist will always be waiting. I survived, but the asylum and its ghosts never truly let go. Whispers beyond the walls. Even after escaping the asylum's courtyard, I felt the pull of Penhist. The night had grown colder, unnaturally so, as if the building itself had followed me into the shadows. Every streetlight flickered. Every passing shadow seemed alive, echoing the cries I had left behind. Couldn't sleep. Every time my eyes closed, I was back in those endless corridors, the floorboards groaning under invisible feet, whispers brushing against my ears. You cannot leave, we remember. Compelled by an urge I didn't understand, I returned to the outskirts of the asylum the following night. From a distance, it looked abandoned, quiet, yet I could feel the energy pulsing, a heartbeat in the darkness. I stepped closer, and the air grew thick, each breath heavy, filled with the weight of hundreds of trapped souls. The front gate, once rusted and ominous, now seemed like a mouth, opening slightly, inviting me in. I hesitated, but a voice, soft, almost childlike, whispered, "You must see, you must know." Inside, the hallways had changed again. Rooms I had never seen stretched endlessly, filled with echoes of lives stolen long ago. Shadows moved on their own, forming shapes of patients long gone. Some looked directly at me, pleading silently. Others vanished before I could reach them. I found a small library, its shelves crumbling. Journals and diaries lay scattered, each filled with scribbled entries of fear, madness, and despair. One book, its pages yellowed and brittle, held the words of a patient named Clara. "They come at night. The doctors, the walls, they know. If you hear us, tell the world. Do not forget." As I read, a cold breeze brushed against my neck. A figure appeared behind me. A young boy, eyes hollow, mouth open in a silent scream. He pointed toward a staircase leading downward. I knew instinctively that this was no ordinary basement. It was deeper, a hidden part of the asylum that even I had not seen before. With trembling hands, I descended. The air grew colder with each step, the walls slick with condensation, and faint whispers surrounding me. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching, hundreds of hands reaching out to touch me. The shadows here were denser, moving with intent, as if guiding me to some horrifying truth. At the bottom, a massive chamber opened. It pulsed with a strange energy, and in its center, a circle of ghostly figures hovered. They were not attacking, they were waiting. And above them, Parker's shadow loomed larger than ever, radiating authority, fear, and madness combined. You have returned brave or foolish. Witness the heart of what we have created, he said, his voice echoing like multiple voices layered together. The ghosts looked at me expectantly. I realized that Penhist had a secret yet untold, a hidden truth even darker than what I had already experienced, and I was about to witness it firsthand. The heart of darkness. The chamber pulsed with a life of its own. Shadows twisted, merging into grotesque shapes that resembled patients, doctors, and figures I could barely comprehend. The air was thick, almost tangible, carrying the weight of countless tormented souls. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhalation seeming to draw in not just air, but the lingering despair of the dead. Harker's shadow loomed above the circle of spirits, his presence suffocating. "Now you see the truth," he intoned. "Every life, every suffering, preserved, immortal, unyielding. And now you bear witness." I felt their collective gaze upon me, hundreds of hollow eyes burning into my mind. The shadows surged closer, and I realized they weren't attacking me. They were showing me. Images, memories, moments of pain and despair flooded my mind. A young boy restrained for days, screaming into the darkness. A woman abandoned in isolation, whispering prayers to no one. A doctor writing feverishly, indifferent to the suffering around him. I staggered, overwhelmed. The asylum wasn't just haunted. It was a vessel, a repository of every torment inflicted within its walls. And in that moment, I understood. The spirits weren't just trapped. They were alive in memory, aware, demanding recognition. The little girl appeared before me again. Her hollow eyes softened, her voice barely a whisper. "Do not look away. Do not forget us." I realized that survival meant more than escaping the building. It meant acknowledging the horror, bearing it into the world. I spoke aloud, my voice shaking. "I see you. I see your pain. I will tell your story. I will not forget you." The shadows paused, swirling around me in a slow, deliberate motion. Harker's figure wavered, his authority challenged by my declaration. The ghosts' faces softened, their agony still present but tempered by recognition. For the first time, the chamber felt quieter. And then the building seemed to breathe. The corridors that had twisted impossibly now aligned. The doorways reappeared, and a faint light shimmered at the far exit. The ghosts receded, moving back into the walls, the floor, the very air of the asylum. I realized that while I might leave, Penhist would never release me completely. The memories, the whispers, the shadows would follow me, as they now always would. I turned toward the exit, each step weighted with the burden I now carried. As I emerged into the cold night, the moonlight reflected off the overgrown courtyard, casting long shadows behind me. For a moment, the asylum seemed still, silent. But I knew it was not. It waited, patient, eternal. The whispers followed me even outside. Soft, insistent, unending. "Do not forget. Remember, bear witness." I had survived Penhist, but I was forever changed. I carried the ghosts within me, the memory of their suffering, the awareness of the building's eternal hunger. And I knew that no matter how far I ran, no matter how much time passed, the asylum and its tormented souls would remain with me always. The haunting follows. The moment I stepped out into the cold night air, I thought I was free. The asylum loomed behind me, silent and seemingly dormant, yet I knew better. Penhist had not released its grip. It had only loosened enough for me to escape. My chest heaved, my legs trembled, but something told me the danger had not ended. The days that followed were disorienting. Every shadow in my apartment seemed to stretch unnaturally. Floorboards creaked in empty rooms. Sometimes, in the quiet, I heard faint footsteps echoing behind me. I told myself it was paranoia, the aftereffects of trauma, but deep down, I knew it was the asylum reaching out, still tethered to me. I began reviewing the footage I had captured inside. Images that had seemed faint or ordinary during filming now appeared terrifyingly clear. Shadows moved independently, ghostly figures appeared in places I had never noticed, and faint whispers overlapped my voice. One night, as I replayed a segment, I noticed a figure standing just beyond the hallway. The little girl. She stared directly into the camera, her hollow eyes piercing, and then vanished before I could react. Sleep offered no refuge. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in those endless corridors, chased by shadows, hearing the screams and cries of hundreds of trapped souls. I realized the asylum had left a part of itself in me. The spirits were no longer confined to walls. They had followed me into my reality. Despite the terror, I knew I had to act. I began documenting every detail, the voices, the figures, the sensations. The asylum demanded acknowledgement, and by recording it, I was giving the spirits the attention they had been denied for decades. Every whisper, every shadow, every fleeting image became evidence of their suffering, a lifeline for their story. The little girl's voice haunted me at night. Do not forget. Tell them. Remember us. I understood then that survival was not simply escaping the building. It meant carrying Penhist with me, sharing its story, and keeping the memory of its lost souls alive. Shadows that follow. Weeks had passed since I escaped the walls of Penhist, yet I could not shake the feeling that I had brought part of it with me. The apartment I returned to, once familiar and safe, now felt wrong. Shadows lingered in corners, stretching too long, moving independently of any light source. The air felt heavy, thick with whispers that I could barely discern. At first, I thought it was exhaustion or trauma, but soon I realized the truth. The ghosts had followed me. Penhist did not release its captives lightly, and by surviving, I had become a vessel for their memories. Every night, I would hear faint crying, footsteps pacing the floor above me, and whispers of names I had never heard yet somehow knew. One night, as I sat reviewing my footage, a shadow moved across the room. My heart raced. I turned slowly, and there she was, the little girl. Her hollow eyes glimmered in the dim light. She did not speak. Instead, she pointed toward the screen, where a new image had appeared in my recordings. A figure I had never seen before, trapped behind a wall of darkness in the asylum. There are more, I whispered aloud, my voice trembling. More who need to be seen, remembered. And then it hit me, my journey was not over. Penhist had shown me only a fraction of its horrors. Hundreds of souls were trapped, each with a story I had yet to uncover. And each night, their voices called to me, soft yet insistent. Witness, remember, free us. I began documenting everything meticulously. Every whisper, every shadow, every vision. The diary entries, the videos, my own recordings, I had to preserve it all. Not just for myself, but for them. Penhist demanded acknowledgement. Its ghosts demanded recognition. The more I documented, the more intense the hauntings became. Shadows moved with purpose now, guiding me to rooms I had never entered in my mind, showing me the pain of lives long gone. I realized the asylum had not ended, it had evolved. The building itself was a living memory, and I was now entwined with it. Sleep became a battleground. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the endless corridors, chased by figures who alternated between pleading and threatening. The little girl, the boy, Harker. They all appeared, each encounter leaving a lasting imprint on my psyche. I was no longer just a witness. I was a participant, a reluctant guardian of Penhist's eternal story. And yet, through the terror, one truth remained clear. The asylum's ghosts could never leave. They were trapped, bound by the cruelty and obsession of their living tormentors. But as long as I remembered them, as long as I carried their stories, they had a voice. Even now, as I write this, I can feel the cold brush of shadow along my shoulders. The whispers never stop. Penhist never forgets, and neither can I. The hidden depths. Despite weeks of avoiding Penhist, a compulsion I could not resist drew me back. The shadows had grown bolder in my apartment, the whispers insistent. Return, see what remains. I knew I had to go, though every fiber of my being screamed against it. Under the cover of night, I approached the asylum once more. From a distance, the building looked abandoned, almost peaceful. But the moment I crossed the courtyard, the air thickened. A low hum vibrated through the walls, resonating in my chest. The asylum was alive, waiting, and aware. I entered through a side door I hadn't noticed before. Inside, the hallways twisted in impossible ways, leading me deeper than I had ever ventured. The walls were covered with markings, scribbles of past patients, warnings, pleas. Some were so old they had faded to almost nothing, but I could still feel the despair embedded in them. I found a staircase leading downward, into a basement I had never explored. The air grew icy, and a damp, metallic scent filled my lungs. At the bottom, a long corridor stretched ahead, lined with small cells, each containing a shadowed figure. They were barely visible, almost transparent, yet their presence was suffocating. A voice whispered from the darkness, "They forgot us, but you remember." I realized these were patients whose stories had never been recorded, souls trapped deeper than those I had seen before. Each cell held a fragment of torment, someone who had died unnoticed, abandoned, left to suffer endlessly. I could hear their faint cries, their muted screams, and I felt an overwhelming need to bear witness. Then, at the corridor's end, I discovered a large chamber. The walls were lined with mirrors, reflecting not my own image, but scenes from the past. Treatments, experiments, moments of fear and despair. In the center stood Harker, or rather, the ghost of him, his figure twisted by centuries of hatred and madness. "Curiosity has brought you here again," he said, his voice layered with the whispers of hundreds of souls. "Few survive twice. Will you bear witness or be consumed?" I knew there was no choice. The asylum demanded acknowledgement. I began documenting everything, speaking aloud the names I could discern, narrating the horrors I witnessed in each mirrored reflection. The spirits responded, moving closer, their forms less threatening, almost expectant. For the first time, I sensed a fragile balance forming. The deeper horrors, the hidden souls, the darkest chambers of Penhist. They were visible now, acknowledged by someone alive. Yet the weight was crushing. I understood that this would be my life from now on. A witness, a carrier of Penhist's eternal story, confronting the forgotten. The chamber with the mirrors pressed in on me from every side. Each reflection revealed horrors I had never fully seen. The faces of patients twisted in fear, doctors' cruel experiments frozen in time, and shadows that moved with malicious intent. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, some pleading, some demanding vengeance that I realized I was no longer alone. Figures emerged from the darkness. Patients, past doctors, even children who had vanished decades ago. They didn't attack me, but their presence was suffocating, like the weight of centuries of suffering pressing down. Their eyes followed me, their mouths moving silently, communicating in ways I could feel rather than hear. Harker's shadow appeared above them all, towering and monstrous. "You see them now. You hear them. Do you understand their torment?" His voice was layered, almost a chorus of the dead. "This is their eternity, and you," he gestured at me, "are now a part of it." Panic surged. I stumbled backward, realizing that every step I took might trap me forever in this reflection of horror. But I had a choice. Acknowledge these lost souls, or succumb to fear and join their ranks. I forced myself to speak aloud. "I see you. I remember you. I will carry your story beyond these walls." The effect was immediate. Shadows recoiled slightly, the whispering softened, and the mirrored chamber flickered. Faces in the mirrors seemed to sigh, some nodding, others fading into light. Harker's figure wavered, uncertain, his authority challenged by the act of recognition. Then, a soft, almost childlike voice broke through the chaos. "Thank you. You see us? You remember?" The little girl emerged from the shadows, her hollow eyes glimmering. Around her, the other spirits began to shift, less monstrous, more human, as though acknowledgement had freed a part of their suffering. I understood then that Penhist's deepest secret was not a physical object, nor a hidden experiment. It was the collective memory of pain, suffering, and injustice. A force that had grown over decades, bound to the building and the lives it had touched. And it needed witnesses. It needed someone to remember, to give voice to the voiceless. With renewed resolve, I began moving down the hallway again, documenting each cell, each shadow, each whispered plea. The spirits followed, guiding me to rooms I had not explored, each revealing a fragment of the asylum's dark history. Every account I narrated seemed to lighten their burden, just slightly, but the weight of their combined suffering remained immense. By the time I reached the final chamber, I understood the terrible responsibility I had taken on. Surviving the asylum was not enough. I had to bear its story into the world, to ensure these voices were never silenced again. And though the path ahead would be filled with echoes, shadows, and whispers, I could not abandon them. The last escape. After hours wandering through the hidden chambers and witnessing the tortured lives trapped within Penhist, I knew it was time to leave. But as I turned toward what I hoped was an exit, the building shifted again. Hallways stretched impossibly, doors led to walls, and shadows moved with intent, blocking my path. The whispers became louder, insistent, almost desperate. "Do not leave, not yet remember us?" I realized that leaving Penhist would not be simple. The asylum had evolved. It would not release me without acknowledgement, without carrying the weight of its countless souls. I pressed forward, flashlight trembling in my hand. Figures emerged from the darkness, patients, doctors, even children I had never met. Their faces pale, hollow, some screaming silently, others reaching out. The little girl appeared, standing in the center of the corridor, her hands beckoning me. "Follow us, follow our story." I ran, weaving between shadows that shifted and twisted around me. The walls seemed to breathe, corridors stretching endlessly. Each step felt like hours. Then I saw it, a faint light at the far end of the hallway. My heart leaped. Could this finally be the exit? As I sprinted toward it, Harker's shadow loomed above, massive and menacing. "You cannot leave untouched," he growled, his voice a chorus of hundreds. "You carry their story now, but your mind will not survive unscarred." I didn't stop. I forced myself forward, speaking aloud the names of the spirits I had witnessed, the horrors I had documented. "I see you. I will remember you. I will not forget." The effect was immediate. The shadows hesitated, the corridors seemed to straighten, and Harker's figure flickered, uncertain. The little girl held out her hand, and a path opened. A stairwell leading upward, toward the overgrown courtyard I had once escaped from. I ascended, each step weighted by the burden of their memories. When I finally emerged into the night air, the moonlight bathing the courtyard, I collapsed, gasping for breath. Behind me, the asylum loomed silent, its presence massive and eternal. Yet, somehow I had survived. But I knew the truth. Penhist had not let go. The ghosts, the whispers, the memories, they had followed me, and I would carry them forever, a witness to a history the world had tried to forget. Even as I left the asylum grounds, I could hear faint whispers on the wind. "Remember, bear witness, do not forget." The burden of witness. Days had turned into weeks, yet the shadows of Penhist clung to me. My apartment, once a place of safety, felt invaded. Doors creaked open on their own. Cold drafts moved against the flow of air, and the whispers, the faint, insistent whispers, never ceased. I tried to return to normal life, to leave the horrors behind, but it was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the corridors, the mirrors, the hidden chambers. The faces of patients, doctors, and the children haunted me endlessly. I had survived the asylum physically, but mentally, I was tethered to it forever. Each night, the little girl appeared, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied by other spirits. They didn't harm me, but their presence was demanding. "Remember, tell them, bear witness," she whispered. I realized the asylum had made me its chronicler. I was chosen to carry its story forward. I began meticulously documenting everything. The whispers, the apparitions, my dreams, the footage I had captured. I created journals, audio recordings, and videos, each an attempt to preserve the memories of those trapped souls. Every word I wrote, every name I spoke aloud, seemed to ease their suffering slightly, but the burden remained. Sometimes, in public, I would see reflections of the asylum in ordinary places. A flicker of shadow in a window, the shape of a hallway in a dimly lit corridor, or the glint of a mirror revealing faces that weren't mine. The world beyond Penhist had no place for ghosts, but they had a place in my mind, in my perception, in my reality. The haunting had become a part of me. I could no longer distinguish between my own thoughts and the whispers of the spirits. Every decision, every step carried their presence. Penhist had given me a gift or a curse, the ability to see, to hear, to remember, and I could not ignore it. I understood now that survival was not the end. Being a witness was the beginning. The asylum story had to be told, its horrors remembered, its ghosts acknowledged. Only then could the weight of decades of suffering find a sliver of release. And so I write, I record, I speak. Because though I am free from the building's walls, I am never free from Penhist. The whispers follow, the shadows linger, and the ghosts, my charges, remain, forever etched into my life. Haunting in the everyday. Life outside Penhist became a blur of normality and terror. On the surface, I returned to routines. Work, errands, the mundane rhythm of the outside world. But beneath it, the ghosts followed relentlessly. At home, shadows moved unnaturally. A hallway appeared longer than it should. A doorway I swore didn't exist seemed suddenly open. Faint whispers echoed from rooms that were empty, calling names I had never heard but somehow knew. Every mirror reflected more than myself. Faces of patients, doctors, and children lingered behind my reflection, watching silently. I began noticing patterns. The whispers were not random, they were trying to communicate. A tapping on the wall coincided with a recurring dream. A flickering light revealed a message on the floorboards that I hadn't seen before. I realized Penhist's ghosts weren't just haunting. They were guiding me, showing me fragments of their history I had yet to understand. One night, I awoke to the feeling of someone standing at the edge of my bed. The little girl's hollow eyes glimmered in the dim light. Around her were shadows of the other spirits, forming shapes that I recognized from the asylum. They didn't speak aloud, they didn't need to, but their presence was insistent. Remember, tell the world, do not forget us. I knew then that documenting their story was no longer a choice, it was a duty. I began cataloging every sight, every whisper, every fragment of memory the ghosts revealed. Old journals, letters, photographs, and newspaper clippings all became tools to preserve their voices. The more I documented, the more vivid the hauntings became. It was as if acknowledging them allowed their presence to solidify. The little girl would appear more frequently, sometimes leading me to objects or places I had overlooked, showing me the traces of the asylum's dark history in the world outside. I realized the truth. Penhist was not confined to a building. Its ghosts, its memories, its horrors, they had spread into my life, into the living world, through me. And as long as I remembered, as long as I bore witness, they would remain visible, demanding recognition and justice for the decades of suffering that had been ignored. Even now, typing these words, I feel the faint pressure of their presence. Shadows linger in the corners of the room. A soft whisper brushes my ear. Do not forget. Tell them, bear witness. Penhist may be behind me, but its ghosts are forever intertwined with my reality. Blurring realities. Days and nights had begun to merge. Reality felt fragile, like a thin veil that the asylum's shadows could pierce at will. At work, in public, even on the street, I saw glimpses of the building. Hallways stretching impossibly, rooms that shouldn't exist, faint figures in the corner of my vision. One evening, I returned home to find my apartment subtly changed. Furniture was slightly out of place. Walls that were blank now bore faint scratches. Messages from long-dead patients I hadn't noticed before. A whisper came from the darkness. You've returned. They remember you. I blinked, and for a fleeting second, my living room became a corridor from Penhist. Shadows pressed along the walls. Figures I had documented in the asylum's hidden chambers appeared, frozen in moments of agony. The little girl floated at the end of the hallway, beckoning me forward. I stumbled back, heart racing, unsure if I had stepped into memory or madness. It became clear, Penhist was no longer just a place. Its essence had followed me, embedding itself into my reality. Every reflection, every shadow, every flicker of light held remnants of the asylum. Even my dreams were no longer my own. They replayed the corridors, the screams, the experiments over and over, sometimes in reverse, sometimes as if I were participating. I began to fear leaving my apartment. Every trip outside was a test of perception. Did that stranger on the street really exist? Or was it another ghost of Penhist, trapped in my waking world? Every sound, every whisper, was laden with meaning, as if the asylum was constantly communicating with me, reminding me that its horrors had not ended. And yet, amid the terror, a purpose emerged. I was their witness, their chronicler. The boundaries between the living and the dead blurred, but my documentation, my recordings, my writings, my voice, became a lifeline, a way to honor their stories. Even now, I hear the faintest whispers as I work. The little girl sometimes appears at the edge of my vision, pointing, guiding, reminding me that though I am outside the asylum, I am never free from it. Penhist lives within me, and I carry its ghosts into the world. The line between reality and memory, life and death, has dissolved, and I know that it will never return. I am, forevermore, a part of Penhist's eternal story, haunting beyond the walls. Even outside my apartment, the world no longer felt real. Shadows moved independently. Faint echoes of screams followed me down empty streets, and reflections in windows revealed glimpses of Penhist's corridors rather than the world around me. One evening, walking home, I saw a figure standing in the distance, a boy I recognized from the hidden chambers. His hollow eyes locked onto mine, and he raised his hand as if beckoning me closer. The streets warped around him. The lampposts flickered in strange patterns, and the night itself seemed to bend toward the asylum. I ran, desperate to escape, but even familiar streets became twisted and unfamiliar. Every turn brought new horrors, shadows that lunged from the corners of my vision, whispers layered on top of each other, and fleeting glimpses of rooms I had only seen in my nightmares. At home, the hauntings intensified. Mirrors no longer reflected me alone. They showed dozens of figures moving behind me, silently screaming, pleading, and watching. Objects shifted slightly on their own. Books, chairs, even the floorboards groaned with invisible weight. The little girl appeared more frequently, sometimes silent, sometimes speaking just above a whisper. "Remember us? Do not forget." I realized the truth. The asylum's essence had spread beyond its walls. Its spirits were not confined to the building anymore. They had attached themselves to me. Every shadow, every flicker of light, every whisper carried a fragment of Penhist's horrors. And yet, amidst the fear, I understood my responsibility more clearly than ever. I was no longer just a survivor. I was a chronicler, a vessel for their stories. Every step I took, every word I spoke aloud, was a way to honor the lives and suffering of the lost souls trapped in Penhist. Even now, as I move through the world, I feel their presence. The asylum may no longer physically contain me, but it is inseparable from my reality. Penhist's ghosts follow, whisper, and guide me, ensuring that their stories will never be forgotten. Voices in chorus. The hauntings no longer came one at a time. Shadows, whispers, and apparitions now appeared in waves, overlapping and interweaving, as if Penhist itself was speaking through a chorus of voices. Each spirit had a story, a fragment of suffering, a memory demanding recognition. One night, I sat in the center of my living room, surrounded by candles, recording equipment, and journals. I spoke aloud, naming every spirit I had encountered. "I see you. I remember you. I hear your cries. The response was immediate. Shadows elongated along the walls. Figures appeared, some solid, some transparent, all gathered in a spectral assembly. Their eyes, hollow yet desperate, fixed on me. They did not speak in words. They spoke in feelings. Despair, fear, hope, and longing. I could feel their pain as if it were my own. Their histories replaying in fragments, interwoven with screams, laughter, and whispered prayers. Through the chaos, the little girl emerged, leading a line of spirits toward me. She gestured for me to pay attention, to record, to witness. I followed her guidance, documenting each vision, each fragment of memory. I saw doctors experimenting, patients restrained, rooms where cries had gone unheard for decades. Each scene was brief yet vivid, like flashes of a dark history, demanding recognition. Then, I realized something terrifying. The more I acknowledged them, the more they manifested. Every name I spoke, every story I narrated, strengthened their presence. The shadows became thicker, the whispers louder, until my apartment was a living reflection of Penhist itself. And yet, amidst the terror, I felt purpose. I understood that the asylum's ultimate secret was not merely the horror inflicted within its walls, but the responsibility of memory. Its ghosts demanded a witness, someone to carry their stories beyond the walls, beyond time. I continued, hour after hour, speaking each name, narrating each fragment, recording every vision. The ghosts responded, moving in patterns, guiding me to truths hidden in decades-old suffering. Through this communion, I became the living archive of Penhist, the vessel through which its voices could finally be heard. Even now, the chorus continues, persistent yet purposeful. The whispers overlap in harmony, a haunting symphony of lives once lost, now remembered through my voice, unveiling the final secret. The nights grew longer, the whispers louder, the shadows denser. Through countless recordings, journals, and visions, a pattern emerged. Penhist was not merely a place of suffering. It was a deliberate construct, a repository of pain meticulously curated over decades. Each patient, each cruel experiment, each forgotten life contributed to an energy that the building itself absorbed. I realized the truth. The asylum's greatest secret was its design. Every corridor, every hidden chamber, every mirrored wall was intentional, crafted to preserve memories of suffering, amplifying them, and binding the souls within. The ghosts were not passive, they were conscious, aware, and guided by this architecture of torment. One night, the little girl appeared, her eyes glimmering with urgency. She led me to a hidden chamber I had never explored, even in my dreams. The walls were lined with records, diaries, and artifacts, proof of the systematic cruelty inflicted over decades. But in the center of the room was something far more disturbing. A pulsating core, almost alive, radiating energy. It was as if the building itself had a heart, feeding on the memories and suffering of its inhabitants. Harker's shadow materialized beside it, larger and more menacing than ever. "You see it now," he said, his voice layered with hundreds of tortured souls. "This is the essence of Penhist. This is what you carry." I felt the weight of centuries pressing down. The core pulsed, and I could feel every scream, every moment of pain, coursing through me. It was overwhelming, almost unbearable. Yet, amidst the terror, I understood my purpose: to witness, to document, and to carry the story forward. The asylum's horror was eternal, but acknowledgement could give its souls a measure of release. The spirits moved around me in a swirling dance of anguish and hope, their eyes fixed on me, not threatening, but pleading. I spoke aloud, my voice steady despite the terror. "I see you. I hear you. I will carry your story. You will not be forgotten." The core's pulsing slowed, the whispers softened, and the shadows seemed to bow, not in submission, but in recognition. The little girl reached out, and for a fleeting moment, her hand almost touched mine. An unspoken thank you, a moment of connection across the boundary of life and death. I realized then that Penhist's final secret was not just the horrors committed, but the power of memory and acknowledgement. The asylum demanded witnesses, and by surviving, documenting, and remembering, I had become part of its purpose. But even as I understood, I knew one thing with certainty. Leaving would not be simple. Penhist's whispers, shadows, and memories would follow me forever, a constant reminder of the building's eternal presence and the lives it had consumed. The climax of shadows. The hidden chamber's air was thick, vibrating with the collective energy of centuries of suffering. The pulsating core at its center radiated darkness and whispers, each beat echoing like a heartbeat of anguish. Shadows writhed along the walls, forming faces, shapes, memories. Penhist itself seemed alive, watching, testing me. Harker's shadow towered above the core, his presence a suffocating weight. "You understand now, witness?" he boomed, layered with the voices of countless souls. "You see the truth, you carry it, but can you survive knowing everything?" I felt every scream, every tortured memory flowing into me, threatening to shatter my mind. My knees buckled under the weight of centuries, but I refused to succumb. "I will not forget you. I will carry your story. Your suffering will be remembered," I shouted, my voice echoing against the walls of the chamber. The shadows recoiled slightly, the whispers fluctuating between rage and longing. I realized that Penhist fed on fear, silence, and oblivion, but acknowledgement could weaken its hold. I began naming every spirit, recounting their stories aloud, describing each horror, each experiment, each forgotten soul. The little girl appeared again, floating above the core. "Speak for us, all of us," she whispered. I obeyed, my voice steady now, even as my body trembled. The ghosts formed a swirling maelstrom around me, but instead of attacking, they listened. My words gave them shape, recognition, and a fleeting release from their eternal torment. Harker's shadow writhed, screaming, layered with the anguish of his victims. The core pulsed violently, as if resisting acknowledgement. I pressed on, recounting every detail, refusing to be silenced by fear. Shadows converged around me, and for a moment, it felt like the darkness would consume me entirely. Then, in a blinding surge of light and sound, the core's pulsing slowed. The whispers softened. The shadows shifted, less threatening, almost reverent. The little girl reached out, and for the first time I felt a connection. A fleeting moment of gratitude from the souls I had borne witness to. Penhist had tested me, weighed me, pushed me to the brink. But through acknowledgement and remembrance, I had endured. The asylum's final secret remained its eternal core of suffering, but I had become its chronicler. Its voices, its shadows, its memories would live through me. I stumbled out of the chamber, exhausted, my mind heavy with the weight of countless lives. Yet for the first time, the shadows followed not in malice, but in quiet acknowledgement. Penhist was still alive, still hungry for remembrance, but I had survived its ultimate test.